So you may be asking yourself, so what, right? So far we've looked at trivial situations where either we have some sort of idea of how to deal with them or they're just not that important of a thing. Why do we care about externalities? So externalities are considered a market failure and a pretty big problem because what about companies dumping toxic waste into a river? Okay? Again, they're just thinking about the benefit to them and the cost to them, not about the cost to other people who then have to drink this water that's now contaminated or would like to use that water for fishing or boating, but now they can't because it's harmed, right? Or would like to swim in that water, but now they can't, okay? Or that water could be used for any number of other uses, but now it can't. So all of those other people are negatively affected by this decision, okay? Or person driving a car and that car's pollution contributing to climate change. Okay? Again, those costs are spilling over onto everyone and the decision maker isn't considering that. Or what about a person who chooses not to get their kids vaccinated against diseases? And so then those kids are more likely to contract those diseases, and so is everyone else around them. Okay? So vaccines are a classic example of a positive externality because if a kid gets vaccinated and they're less likely to get sick, then everyone else around them is also less likely to get sick. This contributes to the idea of herd immunity. So these are really serious problems, and figuring out how to solve them is going to be really important. So fundamentally, all externality problems are property rights problems. Okay? That is, the decision maker doesn't have to deal with all the costs of their actions, so they do too much of it, or they can't capture all the benefits, so they do too little of it. Okay, so the solutions are going to be either things that correct the property rights problem, that again put the cost on the decision maker or allow the decision maker to capture more benefits, or just something that encourages or discourages that action. Okay, right. So positive externalities, we want to encourage that action, and negative externalities, we want to discourage that action. Okay? So we're gonna have both market and legal or government externalities. Solutions to the externalities. Okay, so market and government solutions. So the market solutions, we're gonna have three. So first one is social norms. Okay, so the rules and expectations of what is done in society and what is acceptable are really important for encouraging actions that have positive externalities and discouraging actions that have negative externalities. So like the United States has seen a dramatic decline in the number of people who smoke cigarettes because it's stigmatized. It's considered dirty and disgusting and unhealthy. And so people are less inclined to do it, whereas it used to be extremely common 50 years ago for everyone to smoke. It's just a normal thing. Okay? But those social norms stigmatize it, and so now people smoke a lot less, which is great because that means less secondhand smoke and less of the disgusting smell. Okay? And then the other, another example of social norms would be like expectation that you shower every day and wear deodorant, okay? And then that reduces the costs of smell imposed on people. Second option, second possible market solution is creative entrepreneurship. So I'll have you guys read an article about Walt Disney and his building of Disneyland and how he initially created positive externalities by making Disneyland, and then all the buildings around it were owned by other people, and so they got the benefit of being located near Disneyland, Disney World. No, land, sorry. Okay. And then, but when he built Disney World, he bought up a lot of land to capture what would have been externalities to other people. Okay. And then the third possibility for a market solution is some sort of organization to enforce these social norms. So if you, when you're listening to the example about nice landscaping and how that makes all the houses in the neighborhood more valuable, you might have thought of a homeowners association or HOA. That makes rules about how houses in that neighborhood have to look. So rules about when you can leave your trash can out, or what sort of landscaping you have, or what color you can paint your house, or how tall your weeds can be. And if people are not following those norms, then they get a nasty letter and they have to pay fines to encourage people to keep their houses nice and neat and not let their houses get messy and run down looking, which would lower the value of the other houses. Okay, then government solutions. Okay, we're also going to have three of these. So the first one is to enforce the property rights through courts. So before the 1970s, this was how the United States dealt with these sort of externality problems, like a company dumping its waste in the river. So what people downstream would do is they would sue that company, and they would go to the courts and say, hey, this isn't cool. This company's dumping this waste in the river. It's harming our ability to do the things that we need to do. And the courts were very good about valuing those other uses of the resources. And so they would go to the company and say, yeah, no, you can't do that. You have to pay to clean up all this mess. And so the companies would avoid creating that mess in the first place because it's super expensive to clean up all the waste that they dumped in the lake. Okay? So that's one option, property rights through the courts. Second option, regulations. So like making a law or a rule to either force people to do an action that has a positive externality or force people to not do an action that has a negative externality. So like in some places, your kids have to be vaccinated in order to come to school. Okay? And then that, of course, encourages more people to get vaccinated. Or you could have a regulation that tells companies how to dispose of their toxic waste. Okay? And so that's what we've done since the 1970s with the Environmental Protection Agency. Okay? And then your third option for a government solution is to tax or subsidize the action. So again, the problem is we're getting too much and too little of these actions. So if we want to get more of an action that is a positive externality, we can subsidize it. That is, the government or your insurance company could pay for the cost of vaccinations to encourage more people to get vaccinated. Okay? Or for an action with a negative externality like cigarette smoking, we tax cigarettes to discourage people from smoking as much, right? And there's a tax on gasoline to discourage people from driving as much because that creates pollution. Okay? And so economists, in general, for solving these externality issues, like even for things like maybe climate change, are generally in favor of putting taxes to the size of the spillover cost, so that the decision maker makes the right decision, makes the rational choice about how much of that action it's worthwhile for them, which is really what we want. Okay, but in the end, okay, so this is the next thing. In real life, it's super hard to, especially on the scale of something like climate change or a really big situation that affects a lot of people, to calculate the costs of that action. Okay, so sure, it's a really appealing solution to say, oh, we're just going to we're just going to tax to the size of the spillover cost. But how in the world do you add up all the costs, almost all non-monetary costs, to people who were harmed by an externality? Okay, so realistically, it's just very, very difficult to do.